This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
On this week's programme, we catch up very briefly with our Foreign Minister after he spoke to the Economist conference in Nicosia, and we talk about the aid getting in or not to Gaza.
As regards what's getting in and whether it's enough, it's not enough. It can never be enough. The needs are so huge that we need to be scaling up and doubling down. So we are trying to do as much as possible as regards this element of the situation.
The main part of the programme deals with a European LIFE project, which will see our soil, hopefully, improved through various strategies like planting trees and hedgerows. The idea is to halt, or at least slow down, the desertification that we're seeing in the lowlands of Cyprus.
It's a lifesaver for agricultural land to stabilize soil and to improve also microclimate. Hedgerows and trees have multiple benefits.
The Economist 20th Annual Cyprus Summit is taking place in Nicosia. It opened yesterday, and one of the keynote speakers in the morning was our Foreign Minister, Konstantinos Kombos. He was talking about the Mediterranean in the midst of theatres of war and possible paths to peace. I caught up with him as he left the building and asked him, first of all, if he could tell me how much aid was getting through to Gaza via the Amalthea humanitarian corridor.
We have already up to now sent close to 20,000 tons. There is a new phase of operations that is restarting in the next few days, hopefully. And we are continuing the effort through a different route this time. The question as to what is getting in or who is actually receiving, this is something that's a much more complex operation.
That was what I wanted to ask you. So far we've been sending it to Ashdod.
No.
How can you check whether or not it's actually getting across into Gaza?
We haven't systematically been sending to Ashdod. This is going to be the next phase. The arrangement we have in place is without secondary checks. There's going to be a consignee who is going to be responsible for collecting and then for passing on to the distributor. This is something that is facing the same difficulties as regards humanitarian aid going to Gaza from any different of the various options that are being used.
Yeah, but we have really good relations with Israel, so can we not use those to persuade them to let more stuff in? I mean, it's very little that's actually getting across, and it's not very well secured when it does.
Let's start by the fact that without making maximum use of the good relation we have, we wouldn't be able to have this project in place. As regards what's getting in and whether it's enough, it's not enough. It can never be enough. The needs are so huge that we need to be scaling up and doubling down. So we are trying to do as much as possible as regards this element of the situation, and we are looking now into the new phase, as I already said. So hopefully there's going to be an expanded list of items as well and quantities, and if this gets the continuity we expect it to get, is going to be a small contribution in alleviating the situation. But it's not going to be solved through this.
One quick final question. Again, those good relations, would it not be more productive to call very forcefully for a ceasefire so that aid could get in? It's no good filling people's bellies if they're going to get killed anyway.
We have been asking for a ceasefire for a long time, consistently and persistently. The whole international community is working on that. There are various parameters in relation to that. But in the meantime, there are needs, and we are trying to fill in a small part of that gap, without, of course, this meaning that we are not all insisting that we should have an end to this conflict. Thank you.
Cyprus Foreign Minister Konstantinos Kombos talking to me yesterday.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
We've got some good news on the environmental front. We're going to talk this week about the Life AgrOassis project, which is EU co-funded and aims to establish about 18,000 plants, which will form hedgerows spanning some 30 kilometres around cultivated areas in Cyprus. We're joined by two of the leaders of this project, and they are from the Agricultural Research Institute, or the ARI, Dr. Panagiotis Dalias, and also from the KES Research Centre, Dimitris Saris. So let's start with you, if we may, Panagiotis. The idea behind this isn't just planting, is it? It's what the plants can do to the areas in which they're planted in terms of the quality of the soil, perhaps the need for less irrigation and so on.
Yes, the main aim actually of planting trees is to reduce erosion. That was the first thought, that by planting trees around the fields would reduce the runoff, will keep water inside the field instead of running outside the field, and keep soil in place. That was the main thing. Of course, the benefits of planting trees are multiple, and they can also improve the productivity of the field itself. It can give an extra income to the producer, because we choose to plant the trees that they give fruits or give secondary products. And of course, the increase biodiversity, that's something that most environmentalists and ecologists will say, that we improve significantly all levels of biodiversity in the field. But I have to say that planting trees, creating hedgerows, we call this action as creating hedgerows, is one of the three actions of the projects. We have two others. All of them have as a main aim to restrict desertification, which we can discuss if you want what is exactly the desertification, a central problem, crucial problem in places like Cyprus and Greece and southern places. The creation of a desert is a danger that affects all southern countries of Europe and northern.
And not only Panagiotis, actually there is a report that mentions that 50% of the globe will be affected by desertification by the end of the century. So this is a very important issue. So we are taking an initiative here to combat it in an area where it's absolutely necessary. Almost all lowlands in Cyprus are affected by desertification. And this is something that will intensify in the next decades as temperature rises, precipitation either declines or becomes, we have more torrential rains. So it's a lifesaver for agricultural land to stabilize soil and to improve also microclimate. As Panagiotis mentioned, hedgerows and trees have multiple benefits.
Well, they also absorb carbon dioxide, don't they?
Of course,
This is an additional benefit. It's one way to absorb carbon from the atmosphere and store it into the soil. And we have this in as something for the future for the project to introduce carbon farming through these initiatives. This is one of the goals that we have. But the basic interest is to create conditions that will, as Panagiotis said, combat erosion, increase soil moisture, and reduce temperatures, particularly in summertime. If you sit under a shade created by a tree, under the shade created by a tree, you have almost 30 degrees lower temperature compared to your exposure directly to the sun. So you have 60, 70 degrees when you are exposed to the sun. You have 30, maybe even 25 degrees when you're in a shaded environment. So imagine this, what we are trying to do, to be multiplied all across the island.
Now, can I just interrupt you there? You're doing this on agricultural land, I believe. Mm-hmm. The whole idea is to help our farmers to get a better yield, improve their soil, perhaps use less irrigation because we have a constant water problem, as we know. I know it's across a lot of areas of Cyprus, but how do you select those areas? Are you looking first at the ones that show the most stress towards desertification?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. This is the criterion to select the fields. The vulnerability to desertification, that was the main criteria we put in a formula, let's say, to select the fields after applications, of course, because we firstly discussed with farmers. Some of them expressed their interest to participate, and from those farmers that expressed their interest, we take some local visits. We noted some things about some properties of their fields, and then through a formula that we have, we evaluated the vulnerability to erosion, the vulnerability to desertification.
Have you been able, with that sort of data, to quantify how quickly this desertification is happening? And I imagine how much faster it's going in the last 15 years, perhaps, than it was before.
It's a very difficult question. Very difficult to estimate, desertification rate. We can do it indirectly, but not by measurements. The measurements that we have in Cyprus about that are very limited. Indirectly, we can say that by comparing the situation a few decades ago, or by measuring in dams how much of mud is accumulated at the bottom, so have an indirect way of saying if there is a lot of erosion in the catchment surrounding area. But to be honest, the studies that have been carried out in Cyprus are very limited to say exactly what is the rate of desertification.
And it also has to do with vegetation cover. This is the basic issue. If you reduce vegetation cover, then you are more exposed to desertification processes. So this is one very important aspect. And the other very important aspect is climate. For example, last year, where our project started, we were faced with conditions, regions in Cyprus, which we selected as sensitive to desertification and vulnerable, to receive 180 millimeters of rainfall annually. This is a rainfall that usually northern Egypt receives. So we received in Denia, for example, rainfall that is similar to what conditions are at the rim of the Sahara Desert. If these conditions become more frequent in the future, and we also have models that predict that this will be more frequent, then we will be in a very big, trouble in terms of the process becoming accelerated.
Can I ask you whether or not I'm right in thinking that also it's not just the lack of rain, it's the fact that certainly in the last couple of years, and we've seen it elsewhere, particularly in our region, sudden, terrible torrential storms wash off the topsoil and also causes a bigger problem.
We need to have soil cover. Soil cover has two properties. First, it reduces evaporation, which is very important because it reduces temperature, soil moisture increases in the soil, but also it reduces the speed and the strength of rainfall when it hits the soil. So it creates a cushion. Okay, Amigiotis is an expert on this. So it reduces the energy that rainfall has, and this creates conditions where soil is more likely to stay in place and not eroded.
And of course the rain then soaks in to the roots of the plants, which brings me to my next question about your tubes.
Yes.
I read that you're going to plant a lot of these hedgerows and trees with the roots in a tube, which I understood, and do tell me I've got it right, makes it easier for the tree to get the roots deeper faster so that it can absorb the moisture.
Yeah, this is something that is very important for people to understand. We used to plant at around 30 centimeters depth. But moisture above 30 centimeters is easily lost to evaporation. So if we can get the roots below that level, below 30 centimeters, they are very likely to receive moisture that is stored below ground and is not prone to evaporation.
Does that mean that you don't have to water the new
Exactly.
trees as often?
Exactly. In situations where you succeed in getting the roots at that level during planting, then you have even the need of no irrigation at all. Okay, if you can, in conditions where rainfall is around 300 millimeters, let's say.
And depending on the tree, of course. Olive
And
trees,
depending on
once
the
they're
species,
established, need very little water.
Of course, and this is another issue that we considered when we designed this project. We are using native plants and drought-resistant plants. So the main plants that we use are carob, olive, and pistacia species, and also Mosfilles, which is Craterus, which is a wild pear, something like this. I don't know the English name. We use species that already are adapted to drought conditions, and they already exist in native situations in the island. So we are using species that would be the most suitable for this type of planting. They can survive on their own, and we also use species that also provide some product to the farmer.
So the farmers will be diversifying slightly as well.
Yes.
Let me ask you who's applied to be part of this project, because I presume you've got to get obviously the permission of the owners of the land to do what you want to do. Has there been some enthusiasm on the part of our farmers?
I would say yes. The discussions we've done in advance, at the beginning of the project, we saw great enthusiasm, although there are some limitations to be able to participate in the project. So it doesn't mean that everybody can apply and everybody can get participate. That brings me to the other two actions that we have to say a few things about that. Apart from this planting, we have also an action on reducing the cultivation of land, the plowing of, or even get to the so-called no-tillage farming system. So that's one action. We can say a few things later about what are the benefits of that. And the third is the incorporation of compost, the production and incorporation of compost. So, for example, one limitation I was talking about, that if somebody wants to participate but it uses an incorporation of manure already, is doing this, he cannot participate in our project because he's doing plowing. He is obliged to incorporate manure in the soil, so no-tillage farming is not suitable for him.
So is this only dealing with no-tillage farmers?
For those that they are intending to enter to the no-tillage system.
Okay, so people haven't got there yet, but they're going to change they're part of your project.
Yes.
Now, I know about no-dig gardening on a much smaller scale, which is supposed to preserve, I don't know, the worms and the inherent soil quality. How do you do that on a bigger scale? What do you plant?
Well, we apply it in cereals and orchards, olive groves, for example, or mainly olive groves and cereals. The idea is that when you don't plow the soil, you keep the structure of the soil, you improve the structure of the soil, which is one of the main reasons why we have erosion. And the second benefit is that you take advantage of the wild vegetation that appears after harvesting to create this mulching, this soil cover that Dimitris was talking about. So instead of cutting this wild vegetation, removing these wild vegetation weeds, if you leave them and you cut them superficially at the surface only, you destroy the vegetation, the wild vegetation, you keep this biomass on the soil surface, then you cover this during the summer months.
What about the use of grazers as well on some of these fields? Because that's the other thing. If you bring cows or sheep in, or pigs even, and let them eat what's left of the sort of vegetation you're talking about, they do their own bit of manuring along the way, don't they? Is that a possibility?
Well, this is something that is traditional practice. This is how these systems evolved for thousands of years.
But we don't do it anymore.
We don't do it anymore.
Well, we don't do it anymore because our cattle is in stables. We don't let them move
Roam
around,
free.
roam free. Yeah, and this is another issue which is not directly related to our project, but is related to something very important for Cyprus, which is reducing fine fuel biomass, which can create fire spread. So grazing and browsing are the basic tools that have kept fires under control in the Mediterranean for thousands of years. Now that we use stables and use this type of farming, we let a lot of vegetation become fuel for fire. So this is another issue. It's not related to our project directly, but yes, this is something I would not be against.
Just to take you away from the project for a moment, you're both experts in the field that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Is it time for us to take a step back and look holistically at the whole agricultural sector on the island? How easy would it be? I mean, Cyprus is not that big, and we don't have huge diversity of agricultural products, I don't think. So would it be relatively simple to take this holistic approach and try and cover all the things we've been talking about to improve the soil, the air we breathe, the life of the farmers, and indeed their income?
Well, true. I guess this is the approach that is needed, and it needs to be designed from the government perspective, from top to down. This is the approach. The projects that we are running right now are more or less demonstration projects. We are just showing the way. But if government does not continue with full support afterwards, then these efforts will be, they will not have their full
And
impact.
that is something, unfortunately, we regularly see, particularly when we get EU funding, is we do a pilot project, it runs for a couple of years, everybody gets on board, and then when the 2 years is up, we forget about it.
Well, this is why we need you.
But that is totally counterproductive, isn't it?
We need people that understand the benefit of these measures, of these actions, to continue pushing primarily the government agencies.
I would suggest that it's actually not people like me. It is the government agencies and the ministers who need to understand everything we've been talking about and start implementing policies that will follow through on these projects.
Yeah, the idea, Panagiotis can add, of course, his government, his government in the private sector. The idea is to create systems that are win-win. I mean, both the farmer saves money, the farmer reduces cost of production, and even the government reduces the need to support farmers because they are more economically independent.
Well, they won't have all those payouts that we see every winter when there's a storm or something else. We've lost our crops. Oh, it's all right, we'll pay you.
Yeah,
I mean, we could actually save the government money if we put some of these policies in place. Why aren't they?
Let me say we have something that the problem, one of the biggest problems in Cyprus, that we have so many owners of the land. You have to think that it's very different to being in Africa, for example, where when we apply something, it affects thousands of hectares. And here we cannot really enforce and oblige people to do things if they don't believe in that. Because we have so many ideas, so many owners that...
We're back to the fact that if the government departments were doing their job properly, the farmers would understand why it needs to be done, and they would be clamouring for it to be done and to be part of the solution.
Exactly. So it depends on the work of the government and how they are trying, they are doing correctly their job to persuade people to change some activities, some practices. But at the same time, it's also a matter of the education, the general, let's say, education that farmers have, and their ability, depending on the age, as we said before, their ability to understand and be open to change these activities.
Okay.
So farmers are convinced when they see things working. Okay.
Yes, they need examples, good
they
examples.
need examples. They need example that Yorgos did this and he has reduced his costs. He's still profitable. He saves time. He saves fuel.
Just like this happening now with farmers accepting bird boxes for owls and the protection around the trunks of carob trees to save the fruit from the rats. So we've got examples.
Some good examples, everybody's following for it.
Let me just finally ask you about the volunteers you need to help with the planting, because it's quite heavy work. And although we see a lot of we're going to plant trees projects, very often there are not the number of people you need. Can you get the schools involved or the universities involved? Or is it just Mr. and Mrs. anybody listening to this who can phone you up and say, when are you doing it? I'll come and dig some holes.
No, we mainly ask companies, private companies to come. We excluded children because this tube that we use is quite heavy. And since sometimes they need to carry these tubes for a long distance, we thought that it would be good for children to participate. So we mainly have as a target group the private companies, and we have a lot of people that they are willing to come, and they already participated last year. This year we easily can have 300 to 400 people for the next 2 months to participate.
And of course you've got a whole team, I'm sure, from the Ministry of Agriculture.
Yes, well. We have a lot of people from there. We have 4 departments participating in the projects. So only the partners, if they participate, we have enough.
But we have to plant much more trees this year. So we need support.
So if somebody can support you, what do they do? Can you give out a number, an email, anything where they can get in touch and say, okay, I can bring 5 people, I can bring 20?
Yeah, there's the AgrOassis, Life AgrOassis website where they can...
With one click, they can find the contact people.
There's a phone there, there's the form where they can online have their applications. So, of course, it's a process that we need. I mean, we will not send away anybody. Okay.
So that is Life AgrOassis project.
And we haven't discussed about compost. Compost is very important and very important for the whole, for the management of residues and animal or agricultural residues that can be used, they can be composted and then used in the fields. That's a very interesting activity and very important for the future of Cyprus.
Do farmers here compost? I mean, I compost in my garden to grow my organic vegetables, but that's on a very small scale. Yes. Can farmers compost on the scale that's required? We are seeking for compost from companies that they produce compost at an industrial scale, let's say, not so much at a local scale. But you're right. You point always the right problems. That yes, it's not only the willingness to do something; it's also the availability of material. For the moment, we have a few industrial companies that produce compost. We need more, but we will have necessarily more when we have a separation of food waste, and all this organic fraction of food will necessarily be composted. So the availability and that's
of
the circular
from this
economy going back
when
into
the
soil.
circular economy will be applied in the future, then the availability will be much, much greater.
Well, I'm very sorry we do have to leave it there, but I've been talking to Dr. Panayotis Dalias from the Agricultural Research Institute and from the KES Research Centre, Dimitris Saris. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much.
So look for the Life AgrOassis project, and possibly you could also phone up the Agricultural Research Institute to point you in the right direction if you'd like to lend a hand to improving our hedges, our trees and our soil and our irrigation here in Cyprus. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.